So hello, everyone. This is UX on Coffee, and I am with Scott Gould, coming to us all the way from the UK.
All the way from the UK.
And Scott, I wanted to talk to you because we met a few months ago in Prague, and you were speaking about engagement, and I was so enthused with your talk that I had to invite you to Israel for the next conference we're organizing here, and to speak to you a little bit about engagement. So I want to ask you the first question: what is engagement? How do we quantify engagement?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and hello everyone who's watching this. It's great to be here, and I look forward to being with you in Tel Aviv, later in the year.
Yeah, it's going to be
in May. So engagement is really about maximizing a relationship, right? So when we say that somebody was engaged, it might mean that we had their attention. It might mean that they were really acting and they were really participating. It might mean that they were they kind of made something a part of their lives. But what we're saying in any of this is they were really there. They were maximizing it. They were there in the moment. And so today, a lot of people talk about employee engagement, or they talk about customer engagement, or community engagement, or brand engagement. And all of this is around the issue of how do you make the most of those relationships? And that's what I define engagement as the process of making the most of a relationship. That's precisely what we're talking about, and a very important thing for any organization to be thinking about today.
So you wrote a book about engagement. Do you have it?
I did. I usually, it's on my bookshelf behind me. But it's there somewhere. It's up there. Yes.
All right. So you really thought about this, but is it possible to quantify? I mean, is it possible, because engagement is such a term? I mean, we're engaging. So how do we do this better?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of quantifying engagement, we can start off by saying what engagement is not. What it is not is a Facebook like, or a share, or a retweet. When people say, oh, my post is getting a lot of engagement, actually what they mean is people are interacting with it on a very low level. They're liking it, they're sharing it. And many of us like content and share content without really even thinking about what it is, right? We do it regularly. We could not say what we shared a week ago last Tuesday.
Okay.
But when we begin to build a deep bond with something, and something begins to become meaningful to us, and it's memorable, and we begin to implement it into our lives, well, we know what those things are. And those things we certainly could say we are engaging in a rich and deep way with. So to think about engagement is really think about what maximizes this relationship. And again, clicking, liking, those aren't really maximizing relationships. So the word engagement there is not what they are, but those are processes that do create or are a result of a wider engagement that someone might have with a brand, or a product, or a website, or an app.
And it goes through across. I mean, it's also services, and it's like, how do we design? I mean, can you design engagement?
Yeah. So when we talk about designing engagement, we will think about two things really. First of all, is something engaging enough that it gets our attention? So engaging. Let's take an app. An engaging app would be an app that holds our attention rather than an app that we use and then we forget about, right? So Snapchat is a great example of this, that they sought to make the app an experience and a joy to use. Many apps, the aim is to use them less. They're there to convenience us, whereas there are some apps that really do aim to be a pleasure to use. Snapchat would be one of those. It entices you to stay in because of its fun gestures and the fun features that are built into it. On a deeper level, though, engagement is more than intention. The attention of your user. On a deeper level of engagement is about somebody building something into their life, making it an integrated part of their existence. So we think about apps that really serve a value and a purpose to us. We think about those things which are deeply enabling. Those things, our engagement with them is different. And our engagement is less about our intention and more about our action or our ability that is created as a result of our relationship with them. And so now we begin to think about things like Wikipedia, which have really redefined the way that people consume information and are thoroughly engaging not just in the way that you use it, but in the way that it empowers you. You can quickly learn about a subject in a way that, was not nearly as easy before. We think about, a lot of the social media sites that we use, news apps and things, even the communication tools like WhatsApp or Viber. These are less about how much attention they hold. They're more about the ability that they supply us with. And the evidence of their engagement in our life is shown when we say things like, don't email me, WhatsApp me. This sense of trust, this sense of I can rely on that. I rely on WhatsApp, right? Those groups with my family or my friends, I rely on that to achieve certain things in my life. And without them, some stuff would be a lot more difficult. And so don't email me, WhatsApp me. Now we're talking about engagement at a far deeper level than just does it have your attention or not. This is really about the ability that it provides for you.
Oh, that's very cool. Actually, I wrote down a few things that, because you kind of engage on engagement. You make people more, in my opinion, like you help people remember these rules or these principles in creating engagement.
Yeah.
So you wrote down like you call it the common cold. Can you tell me about the common cold? What does that mean?
Yeah. So there are three processes or levels of engagement, right?
Okay.
And the first of them is about scattering, right? So with engagement, the irony of engagement is you never know who's going to engage with what. And so the best way to overcome that is to make it that anyone could possibly engage with what you do. And so to do that, you've got to make something very easy to spread. And a great example of that is the common cold, right? Cold spreads from one person to the other. But when each person gets it, it takes a slightly different form. So it's very spreadable, but it's also very personalized. And so a great question to us is if we want to make something that we do engaging, which is that it gets traction, it gets interest, people are talking about it, which is certainly kind of an important factor of engagement, is how can we make it like a cold whereby it spreads from person to person? And actually many ideas aren't that spreadable, right? And so a challenge would be, can you describe UX Salon in 3 words, right? It's how do we get things down to such a simple, snappy, memorable level that they spread like wildfire. My favorite example of this actually is Martin Luther King's famous talk, I Have a Dream. A phrase which just goes from person to person to person and continually sticks around, seems to continually have relevance to us. It just keeps on spreading. It keeps on transmutating. People talk about I have a dream when they're not even talking about racism, but they're talking about other things. It's pithy, it's simple, it's quick. And so many of the things that are really engaging are just those things that spread. And the fact that they're popular is just because they're easy to spread, they're easy to share, whereas some ideas are too complex. I remember years ago when I was at school, a long time ago, and we were tasked with creating games that kids could play at lunchtime. And so me and my friend, we created this whole entire board game that kids could play at lunchtime. My other friend, he simply printed off clip art onto bits of paper. His invention did far better than mine, because when people bought his, other people would see that he bought them. It was easy to describe what it was by posters, clip art posters. They were cheap, it was scalable. Whereas mine was this deeply engrossing game that you had to invest time in to play, and it was hard to say what it was. Was it Dungeons and Dragons? Was it Snakes and Ladders? Was it chess? It was hard to explain. So mine just wasn't a code. It wasn't very catchy, and his was incredibly catchy. So on a very simple level, the things that engage us are just catchy.
Simple and great. Like you just grab it. You just have it. You just remember it.
Yeah, and I mean, the best brands are this, right? Apple, think different. iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. Nike, just do it. Adidas, the 3 stripes. I mean, that one's a little bit more vague. I think the 3 stripes, what does that really mean? But, IBM, for a long time was just enterprise computing, right? It's that simplicity that makes things certainly more spreadable and more engageable.
Okay, so the second principle I wrote down is the school plays.
Yeah, so after your messages got out to people, the question often is how do we get people to use our stuff? How do we get people to be engaged in our message? Let's say you've got, you're an UX designer and you want to get that app to be popular and you want people to talk about it and share it. One way is to make it really simple. The next level, though, is a little bit more advanced, right? How do you get them to kind of get involved with it themselves and to involve other people? And a great way of doing this is what I call putting, I call it showcase strategy, or putting the kids in the play, which is every teacher knows, and this happened to me this week actually. Every teacher knows that the way that you get all the parents to come to the school play is you put all the kids in the show, because if a parent's child is in the show, the parent comes along. And so very often the way to engage people is just to involve them in something. For instance, right now, you're recording this video and I'm on it. And when this goes online and I find out that it's online, am I going to share this? You bet your bottom dollar I will. Why? Because I'm in it. Simply, we share things that we're in. Or, to put it another way, we share what we can share. What we share in is what we share with others. And so that's a great way of engaging people, is just to put them in your thing. Now, you can't interview everyone and put that on your app, but real simple ways of sharing an app or an idea is just to involve people in it, even on a small level. A great example of this was the most tagged photo of all time. So some years ago, it was Glastonbury, a big British music festival, and the sponsors took a photo from the main stage of the crowd. And you've got, tens of thousands of people, maybe 100,000 people in the crowd. They put it online and asked people to tag themselves. And because, of course, it was ultra high res, people would zoom in and tag themselves. And of course, the image got shared because all these people were tagging themselves. And every time you tag yourself, someone else sees it, on Facebook, that is, which is the same thing that happens in life, right? When you're shared in something, you share it. Facebook just seems to kind of mirror that. And so this hugely tagged photo was popular. Why? Because everyone was in it. Simple.
That's interesting. And okay, so the third level, or the third principle, is the elbow. What is that?
Yeah. So those things which are really engaging, highly engaging, I call it engagement as enablement, those things that really empower our lives. The way that they do that is they give us new abilities that we didn't have before. Much like the elbow. People don't really talk about the elbow, but when you shake hands, you don't actually shake hands. Shaking hands isn't doing this. It's also not shaking shoulders, because otherwise you're going to be doing this. The thing that you shake when you shake hands is the elbow. It's the elbow that enables you to actually do the handshaking. But you don't think about the elbow doing it. The elbow enables it, but it stays in the background. And those things which are most engaging become the elbow of our lives. Right now, we're on Google Hangouts. Google has become such a part of our lives, it's the elbow. We don't think about it. And yet you would take that away and you have a load of people in this world who would be stuffed. That's a very profound level of engagement that people have with a product that they're not maybe not even cognitively aware of. Now, that would be a benefit of Google, because actually you want them to be cognitively aware of it. But you've got people there who have an elbow that couldn't do a whole bunch of stuff without it. And so the idea of that highest level of engagement is to really become the elbow of the deal. How do you allow two people to shake hands, two people to create a new relationship, and you're there in the background making it happen? And that's what a lot of these hub companies today are doing. Right? Amazon is a giant elbow that hooks us up to new abilities, and Apple and your mind goes blank when these things are so silly, isn't it? Microsoft are doing it, and Alibaba are doing it, and so all these different hub people building off these additional things. And so it's a case of, what can I enable? What platform can I put into someone's life that they can do things they couldn't do before? And that's what seems to deeply engage us.
This could apply to small companies as well?
Apply to any company. If anyone can think about what they can do to enable you, think about a coffee shop. A coffee shop is really an elbow. It's there to enable many people to have a third place between their home and their office, where they can have some time to relax, they can get a coffee, they can wake up, they can have some social interaction. If they view themselves as just a server of coffee, so be it. But they actually, if they can understand that what they really are is an experience or the enablement of someone having that time, and they tap into that, they can make themselves all the more effective in that, right? And so much of this is just understanding what it is that you really provide. Hairdressers, do you really provide a haircut, or are you providing confidence, right? So it's thinking about it on a deeper level.
This is very fascinating, and I'm looking forward to hear more about this in your talk when you come here, and you're going to do a workshop as well. But I wanted to talk to you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
When we met, you mentioned that you were a minister for some time of your career.
I was, yes. So I led a Christian church for a period of about 3 years. And so it was about 30 people when I started, and grew to about 150, which was a wonderful time. So yes, that was something that I did, and for many years before that, I was a volunteer. But I was a pastor. People would call me Pastor Scott, as much as I hated it.
That's very cool. But I guess you were applying some of these principles to creating this community. What did you learn the most about being a minister, and how do you engage with your community?
Yeah, well, religion, for anyone who follows a religion, it becomes a major part of their life, right? It becomes a really important lens. And religion is all about engagement. The way that a religion continues is because people are engaged with it. It's not just because they know of it or attend, it's because they're engaged. It's because their life is built upon it. And to do that, they are very effective at telling stories, reiterating the same idea over and over again, strengthening the core concept, the core sense of meaning that the community is built around. And so many of the things that I now do are taken from that time. And that's very pertinent given the age that we're in, an age where we view products increasingly more for the way that we feel about them, and maybe the sense of meaning and identity that we derive from them. There are some, there's only so much that you can compete on today with features. Take an iPhone, take an Android phone. So many of the features are the same. The difference is, well, what story? What story are you a part of? What sense of meaning are you looking for in your life? And typically Apple fans are people who have more Apple products, and they buy into this sense of identity around maybe being a designer, or being a bit, I don't know, some people maybe feel that it's a fashion symbol for them. People who see, Samsung are doing this marketing campaign around Samsung being a more grown-up device. So if you're maturer, you move away from the crowd. Android have this thing about being a little bit different. Many developers would be loath to use an iPhone, for instance. So it's, what story are you telling? The great example, of course, is that.
Yeah, tell me an example. Give me an example.
Well, I mean, the great example.
Stories from your community.
Well, I mean, the irony is that Samsung make the screens for the iPhone, right? So Samsung make the screens for their competitor. The screen is the same, right? The Samsung screen, iPhone screen, we're all looking at the same thing here. And so I've got this great slide in my presentation where I talk about this, where someone's got themselves an Apple tattoo and someone's got themselves an Android tattoo. And it's a sense of allegiance, really. There's people that they just buy Nike, they don't buy Adidas, they don't buy Reebok. Those people that just buy New Balance, they refuse to buy Nike. Those people that only go to Starbucks, those people that refuse to go to Starbucks and they go somewhere else. So many of these products, they become marks of identity for us, particularly as generally as humanity is less religious, or practices religion less so, attends less so. There's other areas that we go to for identity, and those seem to be many of the brands that we are consumers of. They become these things by which we identify themselves. I mean, I'm a classic example of this. All of my luggage and my bags and everything are all the Swiss brand Wenger. And if I have something that's not Wenger, I get rid of it and replace it with Wenger, because I like their bags, and I like the fact that I just kind of go with that, and I get a little bit of identity from it because it's Swiss and I like Swiss stuff and it just works. And I kind of like to think of myself as being a loyal person, I suppose. But that's what we tend to do, right? Is we tend to ditch the stuff that we no longer want to identify with and buy brands that we do identify with.
But still, like, I want to dig in more to this idea of you being a minister, because I think you learned, probably in these 3 years, you learned a lot about how to engage. And now you said, you shared that the community grew, which is a rare thing in churches.
Yeah, so I mean, so I was doing volunteer ministry work for 10 years before I started leading this church, thereabouts. So certainly being in church and leading in church has been a very, very big part of my life. And I think certainly one of the main things about church is people who attend, by their attendance, they're saying, this is a narrative that I buy into on some level. And so rather than being shy about it, you go, okay, if that's why you're here, then let me supply that. Whereas often we get embarrassed that people are consuming our products, and we don't take their purchase of it as an act of them saying, I identify with you. Rather, we just take it as an act of saying, I'm buying something of yours, and there we go. And we miss the opportunity to build a deeper relationship with them. So one of the ways that I harnessed this was I learned that if someone came along on a Sunday as a visitor, it's because they were interested. They hadn't got there by mistake. And so for me to then go and introduce myself to them as the minister was a pertinent thing to do, because likely they would like to meet me. I've probably been involved in the service in some way, and that was an important thing. Another thing that I quickly learned was, and this is pretty much the way that we grew the church from 30 to 150, was that when people come along to a church, they quickly build a relationship with me as the pastor, whether that's very much as a follower, a congregant, or as a friendship. But there's a sense of they've got some kind of relationship with me. Trouble is that if I fail them, that relationship breaks. And plus, I'm not scalable, right? I can only meet a certain number of people. So what I did was I had it that whenever someone came along on a Sunday service, I asked the church to make sure that if ever they saw someone who was new, 2 people went and said hello to them and offered to go for take them out for a coffee or something that week. And what would happen is someone would come along on a Sunday, they would get to know me, they'd get to know 2 other people, they'd have coffee with them. And now it wasn't just a relationship with me that they had a relationship with 2 other people, which drastically increases the number of relationships and nodes of that relational shape, as it were. And that did wonders for growing the church, because people would come and they would stick around because they had more relationships than just me. So now it was truly a community that was scaling and was growing. And I would really ensure that I explained from the front, and I gave a very clear narrative as to why we did that, which is, if you went along to somewhere that you didn't know and you were a visitor, would you want people to say hello to you and make you feel comfortable? Yes. So we would do that for people who come along. And if they're not comfortable and they say, I'm just listening, then fine. But we found that very few, only 1 in 100 didn't want to chat to anyone. Most people, they were relieved that someone would say hello to them, get to know them, and we'd find that generally they'd stick around.
So it's important not to be sneaky about it, not to to actually explain why you're doing some certain things and why you have people approach.
Yeah, we were just honest. And I wouldn't be shy about that. I'd just say, look, if I would say, if you're here, we'd love to have you. We'll try and say hello to you, and that's cool, great. And if you're just here to listen, just say I'm here to listen, and that's fine too. And it just set people at ease. It made them feel like if they wanted to progress, they could, and we provided the opportunity for that. Whereas now, when I do go to, I visit churches occasionally, and when I do, I always find that hardly anyone says hello, and I always think, why? Why are you not saying hello to me? Why are you ignoring me? And that's the strange thing, right? Is church seems to be a popular place for that. I think maybe it's because we don't want to scare them off. But I'd rather go away and someone said hello and I said it's okay than go away and no one said hello to me. I'm not likely to go back to somewhere where no one made an attempt to greet me.
That's very fascinating. And I actually apply the same at when I organize an event. I try to meet as many people as I can.
Oh, completely. In fact, as a minister, I would do weddings, and the standing joke in my friendship circle was, if you went to a wedding, I'd get to know everybody, right? I'd go from person to person. When I used to run conferences like you, I did the same thing. And it's wonderful. The relationships that I've made as a result of just being available and saying hello was so rich and wonderful. I'm thrilled that I did that.
All right, Scott, I ran out of coffee, which means we ran out of time.
Very good. I like that. I need to use that one.
It was a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to meet you again when you come back. So thanks for your time.
Cheers. Thank you very much, Abby.